Hi folks, and welcome to another guide. Today what I want to do is talk about oil. And what do I mean by oil? Well, oil is a resource used in this game. In particular there are particular units that specifically use oil, aircraft, armor units, mech units, and so forth, and naval units use oil. And I want to talk about how oil works, the mechanics behind it within the game, and how some of the values are actually calculated. So to look at oil resource, what I need to do is go into the build dialog box, and you can see by the second row here, this is the oil row here. You've got numbers 55, 14, and 91. If I go to Italy, the numbers are 7, 6, and 11 here. What do those numbers mean? Well, 55 here for Germany represents the oil that they're getting per turn, whether it is generated by their country or whether or not they receive it through trade. This oil is available per turn for Germany's use. The upkeep is the amount of oil that needs to be used up to keep their units ready for war. That's the idea behind it. And the stockpile is anything that's left over is put into cylinders or storage cylinders so that it can be used at a future time, as I'm going to show you how these numbers change and how these numbers are actually calculated. The same holds true for every country. So Italy has 7 oil points per turn that it has available to be able to do whatever it needs to do with its oil-based units. So let's go back to Germany itself and see how that 55 is calculated. Well, I'm going to remove here the actual units so that you can see the oil icon. I'm going to zoom in a bit here so you can see the oil icon here. This is an oil field by that little kind of tower there. This is a synthetic oil by the barrels here. And the cylinders indicate that you're dealing with an oil resource. The number here is the important thing. So this resource itself, this resource hex, will produce 5 oil points per turn. Similar with this one, it will also produce 5 oil points per turn. Moving out here and taking a look at Romania here, Romania also has an oil resource, and this one's producing 40 oil points per turn for Romania. Russia, similarly, this one 10, 15, and it has a 40 down here, and there's more up here for Russia and the Urals. So those are the oil resource icons, and that's what they actually produce. So the number, if you recall, was 55, and I'm looking at Germany here, and it's got a 5 here, a 5 here, a 5 here, and a 5 here, because when I look at the country, this is the country outline in the start of the 1939 scenario, and this is, I'm just sketching this out quickly. This is exactly the size of Germany at the time. So what I'm really looking at is 20 oil points here per turn. But the question is, it had 55 according to the actual build screen here. So where is the other 35 coming from? Well, either you're producing it or you're getting it from some sort of trade. So I can go to the convoy button here, and I can see here that it seems that Germany has set up trade with the Soviet Union and Romania. The Soviets are giving us 10 oil points, are giving Germany 10 oil points, and Romania is giving 25. So that's the other 35 that I've been missing from the 20 that I've generated. So in total, Germany has at its disposal at this point in time in the game 55 oil points. So you can see capturing oil resources will increase this particular value. So this is one way of actually increasing your oil points conquest, and hence why Germany did what it did. When I take a look at Italy here, Italy has 7 oil points. So I'm going to zoom into the country, and when I zoom into the country, I see resource points, but I don't see any oil here. So Italy itself does not make any oil within its country. So that means if I go to the trade screen and take a look at Italy here, I can see that Romania provides Italy with 10 oil points. But I don't get it, because according to their build screen, they have 7. So what happened to the remaining 3 oil points? Well, it turns out that Italy excuse me, Italy at this point in time is neutral. Germany's at war, Italy is neutral. When a country is neutral, what ends up happening is the amount of oil that they're getting per turn is multiplied by the status of that country. So Italy's status at this point in time is 75%. So if I take 10 oil points from Romania and take 75% of it, I'm going to end up getting, well, 7.5. But if you notice in your build screen, you don't have any decimals, so it truncates the actual value, and you see 7 oil points that are delivered to Italy for its use per turn. So that's how the 7 and the 55 are generated within the game itself. If we're taking a look at stockpile, this is what it's saved. So I'm going to start off with the lower numbers here. At the beginning of the game, what ended up happening was, this is before the game even started, set up in the scenario is that Italy has saved 10 oil points. So again, if I'm going 7 minus 6 here, that means I'm generating a positive 1 oil point per turn. So if I take 10 and add 1 to it, what I've saved at this point in time is 11 oil points to be used, that are stockpiled and stored to be used this turn by my units. That's the idea behind the stockpile. Again, when I'm dealing with Germany here, Germany starts off the scenario having already saved 50 oil points. Well, if I take a look at 55 and I subtract 14 from it, that's going to equal 41. Notice stored is 91 oil points, which I can use this turn for moving or attacking. That's the idea behind it. So this stored stockpile here is we're going to use, and I'm going to show you how it changes as you move units that require oil or attack and so forth. So keep that in mind as you're going through this. But the hardest one, if you want to think of it, and it's not really hard and you don't have to dwell on it, is upkeep. How does upkeep work? Well, I need to add my units here, and I'm going to go to Italy to start off with. Okay, so here is Italy right here. Again, just to kind of recap our number here, upkeep is 6 oil points per turn. Now, very simple, very easy way to remember it is any unit that is off of rail will exert or use up 1/3 oil. So I'm just going to click on this unit here. I'm going to click on rail, and you're going to be able to see some of the units that are off rail, and I'm going to circle them so you can understand what's happening here. So these units are off rail. Well, these units still require supplies delivered to them. So what happens is trucks go out to these units and deliver them food and ammunition. So what happens is for those trucks to be able to do that, 1/3 oil point per unit is used to deliver those supplies. So that means these 4 units that are off of rail will end up using 1 and 1/3 oil point for upkeep. Upkeep comes out before you can make any moves at all within your turn itself. The oil has to be taken out of, whether it be the stockpile or the what you're creating within your country or getting from imports. So 1 and 1/3 oil is being used by those 4 units that are off of rail. If I look further here, I can go down here and see, okay, these units are in port. So whether or not they're in port, these are of supply 9. That's what the manual says. So these are a supply 9, so I don't have to worry about these here. But this unit isn't on rail because this is a dirt road here, and this unit is not on rail. So that means it needs supplies delivered to it, and this will end up using 1/3 and 1/3 oil. So in total, I had 4 units in Italy plus 2 units down in Africa. That's 6 units that require supply trucks to deliver it oil. So if each of them will use up 1/3 here, that's going to be 2 oil points per turn that I'm going to require for upkeep because these units are not on rail. Where does the other oil come or upkeep use come from? Well, that comes from ships in port. Every fleet in port ends up using 1/3 oil. If you notice on the bottom here, it tells me how much oil these four would use if they were at sea. Each one of these at sea would end up using 1. But while they're in port, they use up actually 1/3 oil points per turn. So if these use up 1/3, similar to the units up top here, this is going to use 1 point and 1/3 of oil each turn for upkeep. So how many fleets does Italy actually have here? Well, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 fleets. So if I have 12 fleets for Italy, so let's do the calculation here. 12 fleets. And while they're in port, they're going to use 1/3 oil. That means 4 oil points are going to be used for the fleets alone. My infantry that's off of rail or not in a port uses 2. So my upkeep is going to be 6 oil points. And of course, when I go up to the top here and check, I can see that yes, it is 6 oil points. And that's how that's actually calculated. So keep that in mind. Very easy and simple calculation. Now, if you want to do it and you're really into numbers and stuff like that, like I don't bother with Germany. I just figure out ways of saving oil, and it's sort of like that expression: if you save your pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. What you can do is you click on a unit and see which units are off rail, and you could actually count all the units that are off rail, whatever that total is, then count how many fleets are in port, and whenever you have that total value there, what you do is whatever that value turns out to be, 42 or whatever, I mean, it's really easy to see. It's going to be 14 times 3 here, so 42, and then just divide that by 3. So again, an easy way of doing it is what you do is you click on rail or supply to see which things have supply 9. And remember, anything that's off rail, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you can count all the units, then you count the number of fleets that you have, in this case 42. 42 divided by 3 gives you the 14 that you're getting there. I did that quickly because there's a lot of units that are off rail. And what do I mean by units off rail? Well, if you take a look, this unit is on rail, but that's if I'm just looking at these units right here, 1 oil point here, so let's just circle these here. All of these units are off rail, so this is using 1/3 oil for truck delivery, 1/3 oil, 1/3 oil, and so forth down the line here. So Germany at this point in time, before it's even made a move in upkeep, this is 2 1/3 oil points are being used for supply trucks to deliver the necessary supplies for these units to be functional for their turn. That's a good way of actually putting it. So that's upkeep in a nutshell. So we've seen how these values are actually calculated. Now let's take a look at how they actually change. And actually, before that, I'm going to talk about how to save some oil. From Italy's point of view, it's not doing any attacking or anything like that. If you recall, these units here in Italy are off of rail and are not in a port. Well, any unit that is on rail, for example, does not use the 1/3. These end up using the 1/3 oil. So one way of actually turning around and saving oil is to take these units and move them to a rail or a port. So by moving those units onto either a rail or a port, those 4 units, I have saved 1 1/3 oil points per turn for upkeep. And remember, every point counts in the long run. So the more you save, the more you'll have available for attacks. Now, Going to start off with Germany here, and I want you to pay attention to this particular number up top here. Okay, so which number am I looking at? I'm looking at Upkeep. Whenever you're dealing with Upkeep, the way Upkeep works is oil dependent units end up using oil for moving and for attacking. Okay, so what are oil dependent units? Well, armor units are oil dependent units. I picked Italy because you can see the little icon here with the yellow explanation tells me that Italy is low on oil. So its oil dependent units are going to have problems if I don't start saving some oil to be able to operate properly. Aircraft are also oil dependent units. Again, the little icon appears for you. And naval units, and notice this one's red over here because naval units use so much oil and we're so close to being out of oil, they end up using oil. They're also oil dependent units. And mech units are also oil dependent units. Infantry units are not oil dependent units. So again, if I were to click on an infantry unit here, you can see here the amount of oil is 0 that it requires. So for moving and attacking, it doesn't require oil. But remember, if it's off rail before they get their turn to start, for example this unit here, which is off rail, and this unit, 1/3 oil will be used for trucks to deliver supplies to it, and that's for upkeep. That's totally different from what I'm going to be talking about at this point in time. So let's look at this from our point of view, starting off with an aircraft here. So going back to Germany, I have 91 oil in the stockpile. That's the number I want you to take a look at here. If I take a plane and I actually move it, and now I go back to the top here, notice now I've used 1 oil point to move my oil-based unit. Planes are oil-based unit. So to move, what ends up happening is an oil-dependent unit will use 1 oil point to actually move. So keep that in mind, please. And where does it come from? It comes from the stockpile. Remember, the upkeep you've already used up. That's just to get you ready for this particular turn. The amount of oil for moving and attacking comes out of your stockpile. The same holds true, and again, I'm not doing any kind of special attacks here to attack Warsaw or anything like that. If you take an armored unit and you go to move it, so remember, let's go back so that we can see the number. It turns out to be 90 here. If I take an armor unit and I go to move it to this particular location, it doesn't matter how much you move. What ends up happening is I've used another oil point in my movement. So I went from 90 to 89. So moving armored units and aircraft units costs you 1 oil point to be able to do that. But as we were talking about saving techniques for Italy here, moving them with rail, or sorry, putting them on rail, let's take a look at Italy here. This is an oil dependent unit, so let's go back to its stockpile. Its stockpile is 11 right now. If I take this and I move this unit by rail and I go back up, notice it does not change. So moving units by rail is actually a way of saving oil points. So that's one of the better ways of actually moving units around. If you can get them to move on rail, what ends up happening is you'll be able to save oil points. Note also, what I do when I'm taking, after I conquer, let's say Poland, and I'm moving towards the west here, I always try to end my turn on rail. So as I'm moving my units here, I end them up on, I let them land and end their turn on rail. And now this unit here, when the next turn happens, this upkeep is going to be 0 because this unit is now on rail. Remember, that's one way of also saving on your oil here. Now, each one of these units uses up a certain amount of oil for movement, which is 1, but also for attack. And when it goes to attack, they all use different amounts. The question becomes, what are the amounts that they actually use? Well, you can use or see that from the tables found within the manual on page 39, 40, and 41. And the row that shows you that is their oil use here. Okay, so when you're taking a look at this, this is the oil use here, and you can see that these units here end up using 2 oil uses. What are those 2 units? They're mech and armor. So that means when the mech and armor attack, and remember this is for version 8.1, there's some changes that are coming down with oil use in the new version once it becomes official. But at this point in time in version 8.1, mechanized and armor units will use 2 oil points for attack. If I move down, I can see on page 40 the air values for oil use, and I can see for the fighters and the ground support they each use 2 oil, whereas a tactical will end up using 3 and a strategic air bomber will end up using 4. And when I take a look at fleets, I see subs use 1, patrol groups 2, cruisers 2, battleships 4, and aircraft carriers 3. Now, oil use for fleets is somewhat different. If I'm moving out of a port, I don't use oil. But to stay at sea, a sub will use 1 oil point. A patrol group will use 2. A battleship will use 4, as I'm going to show you here, and put Italy in trouble. So going back to the scenario here, if I take a look at Italy, you can see how quickly I can get Italy in trouble by simply, well, here, if I look at Italy, it's got 11 points here. If I turn around and let's say, okay, I'm just going to fly here for fun. I'm going to come here and I'm going to fly for fun here. And I'm going to take this plane here. I'm going to fly for fun. And I'm going to fly this guy for fun. Just for the heck of it. I've used 4 oil points for no purpose whatsoever. And Italy requires its oil points, so you need to be somewhat careful in the way that you actually use your units. And what I'm going to do now, just to kind of show you what happens next turn, I'm going to take 2 battleships, the 2 cruisers, and let's say a destroyer here, and I'm going to move them out to sea. Now, when I take a look at this, moving out to sea has not changed my stockpile value. So moving out from port to sea will not use oil. But on the next turn, the upkeep for this particular, and you can see here it's giving me a warning, you're not going to have enough oil. The upkeep for this is going to be 14 oil, which makes perfect sense because the battleships are 4 and the cruisers and the patrol groups are 2, and when you add all of those together you end up getting the 14 oil that's going to be used for upkeep. Remember, moving out doesn't cost you any oil. Speaking of which, if that's the case, when I'm looking at fleets, one way of saving oil is to move from port to port. So remember, just to take a look at this, this is 7 here. If I move from port to port here, I do not exert any oil. So that's another way of actually saving oil. That is, don't leave your fleets out at sea if they're not performing a mission. But if you need to move them, try to move them along port to port to be able to save as many oil points as you can. So here are the 3 points again. Try to leave your units on rail when they're not in any sort of mission at all, or in a port, and leave your ships in port. And if you have to move your ships and they're not really on a mission, try to move from port to port. And last but not least, if you're going to move units, especially armored units, mech units, and even aircraft units, move them on rail, because when you move them on rail, that will also save you oil points, which is vitally important for your attacking and so forth. So let's take a look at now at a combination attack that we do all the time. Remember, your oil dependent units will use oil. So I'm going to go up to Germany, and right now I end up getting, I've got 89 here, so I want you to keep this in mind. So 89 is what I have here. So I'm moving this forward here. I am now going to put this in full support mode so that when I go to do an attack, this is going to jump in here. This is already in full support mode. So when I go to attack this particular unit here, what ends up happening is I've got an armored unit here, and according to the table, this will end up using 2 oil points. This is a ground support, so it should also use 2 oil points. So just by attacking, I'm automatically going to use 4 oil points with this particular attack. Now, if they counterattack, what will end up happening is my interceptor, which would normally use 2 oil points, has a chance of using 50% of its oil according to this, so it might end up using 1 oil point out of this. So I'm looking at a possibility of 5 oil points being expended on this particular attack. Remember the value. The value was 89 that I'm looking at. So I'm going to turn around. I'm going to perform my attack here. I got my planes reacted, and I had my armor unit attacked. I go back to this and notice it's 84. So I've dropped down 5 oil points for that particular attack, remembering that it comes from the stockpile. So if this turns out to be 0, I'm going to have problems moving my units afterwards, in particular air units, and what will end up happening is my land units will be affected also. And ships shouldn't be able to come out of port according to the manual. Notice here now what ends up happening, and I'm not sure if this is a bug or not. Remember, this number is 84 here. At least for version 8.1 here, if I go to move my actual armor unit, remember it was 84, what should happen is this, oh, and it does. Okay, so we're good here. So again, any movement or attack, so it was at 84, now it's at 83, so it cost 1 oil point to actually move. So moving and attacking oil units. Oil units are armor units, naval units, mech units. I wanted to emphasize those. Those and airplanes are what we call oil dependent units. And that's how this actually, the oil works. Now I want to show one turn here. I'm sort of getting off track here, which I don't want to. Italy has, because that's the one I want to show, it's got 7 stockpile. It's going to make 7, which is 14, but it's going to be using, did I get enough ships in here? It's going to use 14. Okay, so I'm going to be close here. What I might do is put out another ship to make sure that it goes way over. Okay. Okay, so let's move forward here. A turn. Remember, what I want to do is I want to show you what happens when you have 0 oil in the mix, and how units are affected and so forth. And once again, there is a table, I believe it's on page 55 in the manual, which explains everything, and I'm going to show it to you in a second so that you can see what's happening with the units themselves as I move through the turns here. Okay, so Italy's the important one because it had low numbers, and we can see now it has 0 stockpile. So it created the 7, but it's using 20. It only had 7 remaining, so when you go to subtract it, I'm dealing with 0 oil that's remaining from my calculations. So what happens when I have 0 oil? Well, according to the manual, what should happen, and this is found on page 55, tanks themselves have 50% operational points. They lose 3% effectiveness per operational point, and they lose 20% of their strength. Also, they can't attack, but they can defend out of all of it. Air units can't move, so they won't be able to move. They can't attack or defend out of all of it. And when you look at naval units, they shouldn't be able to move out of port here. They can't attack, but they can at least defend. So this chart here tells you what happens when now for Italy in this particular turn, the effects of not having oil in their stockpile. That's what this actually shows you here. So with this in mind, I'm going to take a look at this, and I reported this. If I go to try to move this out, this is not supposed to move out of port, but it does. I think this is a bug in version 8.1, so this is not supposed to leave port, but it does. But notice my error. If I go to try to move it, Italy doesn't have any oil to move for this particular turn. It can't actually move. If I go to take my look at my armor here, I'm limited to what I can do here. It's been reduced in effectiveness when I take a look at it. It can only do half the stuff that it normally used to be able to do. So you can see, even though I can't move as far as I normally could have moved before I had oil. So before I was up here, I could have probably moved all the way down here, maybe even past here, but now I can't out of all of it. But I can make the move, but I'm limited to what I can do, and you can see I'm losing a lot of strength right off the bat. I can still move, but it's really going to impact my effectiveness. Notice my numbers are dropping a great deal, which normally wouldn't have happened as I normally would have moved if I had oil out of all of this. So I'm losing effectiveness by even moving it a great deal. So keep that in mind. So the impacts of not having oil on units that require oil are actual detrimental. Now Italy's neutral, so I can't have it attack anybody at this point in time. But and Germany has at this time 125 oil in the stockpile, so I'm not going to be able to show you that it can't attack, but it can't. So again, going back to the table, when you take a look at it, any land unit that is considered motorized, these are the effects, and this can be found on page 55. The air effects are here if it's out of oil, and the naval effects are here. So with that said, this concludes another video guide, and hopefully this helps you save some oil and be more effective with the resource oil. I've showed you how it's actually calculated. I've showed you some strategies on how to save oil, and I've showed you the impact of running out of oil in stockpile. And hopefully, like I said, this guide explains some of the basics so that you don't have to count units. There's not too much micromanaging in this game, which I love. By just having the general idea of how things work, you'll be able to have enough oil to be able to do whatever you need to do. In all resources, and even in war, Germany will always tell you, or even the Allies, I wish I had more resources. That's just the anxiety of war. But the reality of the situation is you don't have to micromanage. You just have to understand the system, and hopefully I've explained the system to you, how it works with version 8.1. And this better understanding will help you to be able to conserve some oil and be better prepared for your attacks. Have yourself a wonderful day, and as always, thank you for watching.